But yeah, thank you all for coming today. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about the government and its role in healthcare, something which we've touched upon in previous sessions, but we're going to be looking more at kind of financial incentives for the government to promote good healthcare, and the different ways in which they can do that. So firstly, we just want to ask you what you already know about the role of the government in providing or promoting good health within the country. So, if you have any ideas surrounding that, then please do put them in the chat. Or, if you'd like, please do unmute yourself and tell us out loud what your ideas are. Obviously, I'm sure a large part of what you'll be thinking about is the NHS and the kind of role the government has within the NHS, but also try and think about any other incentives that the government creates or any other kind of any other roles that it plays. Right, so we've got someone saying the government wants to focus on prevention as well as treatment of diseases and conditions. Yeah, that's very true. And I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more on that. So how does it achieve that? Do you know anything that the government does specifically, any schemes which the government uses to try and improve the treatment of diseases and conditions, aside from the NHS perhaps? Someone's put free healthcare system. Yes, so in the UK, we have the NHS, which is a system which is free at the point of use. People are able to access a large range of treatments for free. And the reason for that is because the funding for the NHS comes from taxpayers' money. So the government has a large role in that sense. Someone's put, for example, trying to reduce smoking so that there is less cases of lung cancer. Yeah, that's very true. And, there are a variety of ways that they do this. For example, tobacco isn't really allowed to be publicly displayed in certain shops. And also you'll notice on cigarette packets, if you've ever seen one, there's always like kind of a big picture of like, someone's teeth or something like that if there's a smoker, if they're a smoker. So it shows kind of the damage that can do to raise more awareness about that. And of course, cigarettes are taxed very heavily as well. So those are all ways that the government tries to reduce smoking because we know that it's a very big risk factor for lung cancer and a variety of other diseases as well. Someone's put, might they fund private companies? Yes, I suppose in the sense that they could provide subsidies for certain companies which are, promoting healthy food or selling healthy food or services like, or products like good, gym equipment for schools or something like that. So, I suppose they might, in order to kind of promote good health among the population, smoking cessation services alongside dietary exercise advice are examples of preventative measures. Yeah, exactly. So, something we've talked about before. Exercise advice as well is a big one. They fund the NHS. Also during the coronavirus pandemic, they have given out lots of briefings to tell us with the current state of our country's fight with coronavirus. Yeah, that's very true. And that's something which is very specific to the current situation. But even outside of coronavirus, there are often government funded TV adverts or something like that, stuff like that to try and promote good health, to increase the risk of, increase the awareness about the risks of smoking, for example, obesity, which is something we're going to talk about a lot in this session. No adverts for tobacco or cigarettes. Yeah, that's very true. And also incentivizing fast food companies and supermarkets to encourage more healthy eating, make national health policies. Right, so we've got a big range of ideas here about things that the government does. Yeah, someone's also put educating young children, like encouraging them to walk to school. That's something which is encouraged in schools a lot now. So yeah, we've got loads of ideas here about, the different things the government does. We're going to be talking a bit more about these ideas and whether they're really helpful in tackling obesity. That's the main thing we're going to be focusing on today. So yeah, we're going to move on to the next slide. So yes,
So we're going to talk about the dangers of obesity, and I'm sure everyone already knows about these because this is not a topic which is fairly new, but everyone should know about the dangers of obesity. And especially when you get to medical school, obviously you'll learn more in detail about the different types of causes that lead to obesity, whether it's environmental, genetic, but also if you like, I don't know if you guys do A-level biology, but you'll also learn about environmental factors and epigenetics affecting your predisposition to get obesity or to become obese. Needless to say, obviously, diet is the main factor, so you should be eating as healthy as possible to avoid obesity. Obesity is the largest single risk factor for disease. It is especially associated with diseases of the heart, including coronary heart disease. We've covered how obesity actually increases blood pressure in the previous session. If anyone can remember, you know, in the blood vessels leading to the heart, if you've got an extremely high amount of fatty deposits, that can actually lead to a smaller lumen, which means that there's increased pressure. But not only this, but, you know, if you're clogging the arteries, that means blood can't reach the heart, and that leads to a heart attack. Similarly, stroke, obviously, you know, stroke is when blood doesn't get to the brain. Almost 2/3 of adults in England were obese in 2017, and over 10,000 hospital admissions were obesity related. And actually, I read a study that said, which I was really surprised about, but UK has one of the highest obesity rates in the entire world. And so it's really interesting to see, you know, even though in a country where we are very proud to say it's a sovereign nation with great amounts of wealth, that we still have such a high rate of obesity. Obesity can also contribute to the development and incidence of cancers, diabetes, strokes, and respiratory diseases, as I mentioned. And people who are obese are also more likely to experience discrimination due to prejudices which exist about obese people. I'm sure everyone knows what we're talking about here, fat shaming. And we will be talking about fat shaming later in this PowerPoint, but it's very important to think about it as we're speaking. And this can obviously lead to mental disorders and mental health issues when people don't feel confident about themselves, which can lead to anxiety and depression. So you can see how a physical detriment to your body, for example, obesity, which is a really, really bad condition to have, can actually lead to mental issues as well, which is not good at all. And as Shivas has just brought us onto the next slide, there are lots and lots of health risks of being overweight or obese. So, for example, like we said, heart disease and stroke. Just a question before I carry on with the slide. Can anyone think of why heart disease, apart from the fact that, you know, higher blood pressure, why is fat in, you know, why can it lead to heart disease and stroke? I'm trying not to give the answer away here, but can anyone think of any other ideas of why, you know, maybe a high level of fatty acids in blood, or, you know, what does it mean to be obese? What exactly does it mean? More fatty acids, can that cause blood clots or atheroma? Fat in arteries causing blockages, deposits increase chances of clots forming. Yeah, so there's a lot, well, really good ideas, guys, really well done. And it's very important that we think of lots and lots of ideas. Obviously, when you get to med school, you'll see in very specific and precise detail on each of these ideas, but it's really important to think of it in a holistic view rather than just being, you know, obesity links to bad health issues. You need to think about these in great detail if you're going to apply for medicine. Okay, gallbladder disease, just quickly, anyone put it in the chat? I'm going to carry on talking, but anyone put it in the chat, what is one function of the gallbladder? Just to keep you guys thinking. It can lead to type 2 diabetes, it can lead to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, fatty liver disease. Yeah, exactly. So it can store bile salts, really well done. And sleep apnea. So, you know, let's think about this again holistically. If you're having troubles sleeping, what can this lead to? Why do we need sleep? And why do we, what's the specific type of sleep, which is the, like the specific stage in sleeping? Yes, exactly. Someone hit it on there. Yeah, exactly. Really well done. REM sleep. Well done. So you need a certain amount of REM sleep to be actually awake. And so you could actually just lie in bed. That's why when you're just laying in bed, but you're not truly asleep, that counts technically, I think, as sleep, but the problem is you're not getting enough REM sleep, and you need REM sleep to feel relaxed. And again, you should be getting roughly 8 hours a day. Obviously, being med students, I'm sure you guys work really hard, study really hard. School, especially when you get older, can get really tough. University can get really tough, and I'm sure you guys are trying your best, but it's very important to get a good amount of sleep, which, I mean, obviously cannot be overstated. And obviously it can lead to, sorry, not obviously, but very unfortunately, obesity can lead to cancer, which we don't need to tell you is highly difficult to cure, but also in many cases, very, very emotionally draining, not to mention the physical deficit that it has on your body.
Yeah. So, you know, as Sinan said, there's obviously a lot of physical kind of problems that it can lead to. But, you know, what's not on this slide is the kind of secondary effects that obesity can have, which, you know, has, it can have a large mental toll. It can lead to stress. Indeed, it can lead to mental health disorders as well. So it is quite, you know, it's the single biggest kind of risk factor for disease in general. And that's why it's such a big priority for the government in particular to try and address it, especially in, you know, developed countries, in countries where there is a big consumer culture, like this one, where it's very easy to buy food which is high in fat. That's, you know, that does lead to many people in the population being obese, becoming obese, and unfortunately, it's very easy to, you know, fall into the cycle of kind of buying unhealthy food, consuming unhealthy food, and unfortunately, that is something which is even more prevalent in you know, poverty, or areas where there is more poverty. So yeah, I think we'll move on, and we're going to talk a bit about the sugar tax, which is something I'm sure you will have heard of in the news, and it was, you know, quite a big story a couple of years ago, in April 2018, when the sugar tax was introduced in the UK, and that required manufacturers of soft drinks to pay a fee to the UK Treasury if their products contained more than 5 grams of sugar per 100 millilitres. And statistics did show that the scheme was somewhat successful. It did decrease the amount of sugar through fizzy drinks that was being bought by households in 2019. But some people do still think that this drop was not really caused by less consumption of these products, but simply because the manufacturers themselves changed their recipes for drinks to include less sugar. So, you know, it didn't really send a message to consumers, but rather the manufacturers. So, which I suppose did, you know, have the intended outcome, but still not really addressing the issue of people, you know, being able to buy these products so easily. And, you know, this just covered drinks, so it didn't really help address the issue of food fat, you know, which again is another major cause of obesity. So we want to ask you a couple of questions now and just see what you think about this. First of all, is a sugar tax ethical? And try and think of this regarding the 4 pillars of medical ethics. You know, if a government was to impose a sugar tax on its population, is that something which is morally right? When you think about the 4 pillars of medical ethics, to remind you, if you don't remember, those are beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, and autonomy. And I think, you know, there are 2 of those pillars which are particularly important in this situation. And then also the second question: do you think that taxing unhealthy foods is the best way to increase healthy lifestyles? And which other ways can you think of? There are a couple more that we'll be covering today. But, you know, do you think that a tax will really have the best outcome on consumers and on obesity in general? So we've got a few answers in the chat. Someone said infringes on society's freedom. Yeah, and I think that's the main problem here, about freedom and kind of people's rights to make their own decision. A sugar tax, you know, many would argue is an infringement of those rights. It's not really allowing people to make their own choices about what they're consuming. It's kind of forcing them to consume in a certain way, which, you know, obviously is related to the pillar of autonomy, people's ability to make decisions, informed decisions for themselves. Someone has argued, yes, it is ethical. Consumers still have the autonomy to decide if they want to drink stuff higher in sugar concentration, and companies still have the freedom to produce it. Okay, that's fair enough. You're arguing that the freedom has not been completely removed. Consumers can still buy these things, and, you know, companies can still produce them. It's just the fact that they are less incentivized to do so. So, okay, that's an interesting point. Someone else has argued autonomy. People should have the right to decide what they do to their bodies. Beneficence, it's beneficial to their health. Yeah, So those are the kind of main two arguments. If we're looking at it from a kind of more general perspective, looking at the entire population, it's a similar thing with vaccination, really, or any major kind of decision. It will help the population as a whole. If we have less people who become obese, or less people who are unhealthy, that has a lesser strain on our health, on the NHS, and therefore, it increases the ability for our doctors and nurses to treat other patients. And also the government can spend money on other aspects of society, for example, education, welfare, that kind of thing. So, it's beneficial to everyone if we're addressing this single issue. But at the same time, should we force people to behave in a certain way just because it might have a greater kind of outcome for the rest of the population? Right, and someone else has said, I would say beneficence and justice sort of clash here. Poor people suffer more from a set tax, but may improve public health. Yes, that's very true. And we've got to remember that any financial incentive will no doubt have a greater impact on people who are poorer, people who live in disadvantaged areas or who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And at the same time, at the opposite end of the spectrum, people who are very wealthy, this may not affect them. For example, if you have a large brand like Coca-Cola, a large manufacturer, then, imposing this sugar tax might not have such a big impact on them, because as a company, they are so big, they can just deal with it. They can just pay the tax and carry on putting loads of sugar into their drinks, because it won't have such a big impact on them. And similarly with consumers, those consumers who are very wealthy, it doesn't really matter to them. They will just go for more expensive options, even if they do contain a lot of sugar, whereas that choice isn't really available for poorer consumers. So yeah, we've got more people talking about those different pillars. Someone said taxing isn't the best way to increase healthy lifestyles because because people with higher incomes can just buy it anyways. Yes, so that's what we just said. However, it does provide more money for the government to spend on healthcare. Yeah, very, very true. Not the best way, someone said. Consumers are still consuming the same drinks and are not actually changing their diet to healthier options. Yeah, so we can see here on the slide, we've got that, the drop was not caused by consumers buying less soft drinks. It didn't actually address the real root of the problem, which is consumers kind of the consumerist attitude, the fact that people wanted to continue buying these products. So it didn't actually mean that they were changing their diet. And that also shows that the kind of awareness that this scheme was intended to create didn't really come about. People still just carried on buying unhealthy food and drinks. Yeah, so someone's literally just said that here, sugar tax isn't addressing the root of the cause why people are eating unhealthy food in the first place. We've got someone talking about justice. This will affect lower socioeconomic groups since fatty foods tend to be more affordable, but raising their prices affects these groups. Yeah, the government could use other ways to increase healthy lifestyles. They could try to focus more on educating people rather than just changing recipes. And that brings us quite nicely onto the next slide, which is another couple of schemes which have been considered in the past. The one on the left talks about an anti-obesity program in primary schools, which was, a kind of encouragement scheme to allow children to exercise more, to eat healthily. But, this didn't really work because, a large part, even in schools, if students were encouraged to, undertake physical activity, schools weren't really able to check what children were doing at home. And, if children are already in a mindset or are brought up consuming unhealthy foods, then that's quite unlikely to change, unfortunately. And, similarly, we've got another scheme on the right, which is a slightly more recent one, which was the consideration of the government starting to offer financial rewards for people becoming healthier rather than, and this scheme kind of works by the government expanding access to weight loss services, giving people, paying people potentially to go on weight management courses. And obviously you can probably figure out that that doesn't necessarily, again, that has the same issues with regard to people who are already in a mindset of being overweight, and also people who don't need money, like, the rich, for example, it might not affect them so much. It might not be able to reduce obesity in these groups. So yeah, these are just another few issues. But again, it doesn't really address the problem of the availability and low cost of fast food. And so, if we go back to the last slide, sugar tax, it didn't really address the main issue underlying it. And in Denmark, actually in 2011, when a fat tax was introduced, instead of cutting down their fat consumption, Danish consumers just crossed the border to Germany to buy food there. And this was kind of a big issue because it showed that people didn't really care about their fat consumption. They just wanted to, they would go to any length really to buy this food. It wasn't really raising awareness in the right way. So yeah, those are just a few points to consider, which we'll talk about a bit later. But I think we're going to move on now and talk a bit more about financial incentives. Yeah.
Cool. So financial incentives for healthy lifestyles. Now, obviously, this is quite a controversial debate because, and actually, Shivas and I were talking about this, and we thought, there are quite a few views. Either the government should be sort of campaigning for people to get fitter, but then should there be some sort of financial incentive attached to it or some sort of monetary value attached to it? Because could that potentially make it seem less pure and out of less pure intentions? The other side of the debate is, does the purity of an intention matter if it's done in a legal way and if it's, the end product is something that's beneficial to everyone? So Shivas found this example in 2015. Puerto Rican Senator Gilberto Rodriguez Valle put forward a plan for teachers to look out for students who were obese. Their parents would then be contacted and asked to initiate a diet and exercise routine. If there was no improvement to BMI after 6 months, they would be fined up to $800, which is about £525. Critics of the scheme thought that the idea of teachers and parents acting as body police would only further stigmatize being overweight. Many also argued that the scheme would be unfair to students with genetic causes of their obesity. So let me ask you two questions. Should parents be fined if their children are obese? Is this ethical? And should parents be rewarded if their children pursue a healthy lifestyle? Now, just a word of information. That second question originally said, should parents be rewarded if their children pursue a vegan lifestyle? Now, that's actually, when Shivas wrote that, I actually got to thinking because, and actually we were considering this as well. Does vegan and does a specific type of lifestyle always count for healthy? Because obviously, when it's tricky, because is a vegan lifestyle always healthy or is it not always healthy? Why do people say that vegan is healthy when, for example, meat eating isn't? Obviously, we're not looking at the argument about animal rights here, which are very important, and obviously animals should not be exploited as they are, but we're more looking into the side which says, is a vegan diet in itself healthier than a meat-eating diet? Okay, so some comments. Government, sorry.
Can I just interrupt there? Just add in as well, a vegan lifestyle. Yeah, that's something again which is, has points for and against, and also it raises the issue as to whether, if people were rewarded for pursuing a vegan lifestyle, why shouldn't people who are pursuing a meat lifestyle, eating meat, also be rewarded if that's still healthy? Because eating meat can be healthy if people eat it, in moderation, as with any food. So is that something we should really be rewarding people for pursuing? I think that's just kind of the reason why we changed that question. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, that was a good point, actually, and that's what we're trying to convey. It's a multifaceted argument. Okay, so the government could use other ways to increase healthy lifestyles. They could try focus on more educating people rather than just changing recipes. Okay, that's a good idea. Let me play devil's advocate. Educating people seems like more of a long-term solution. Do you think that we would see current people who are not in the education system, people who are working class, like people who are old enough to work, would they have any effect? Would there be any effect on these people from this education scheme that you're mentioning? I don't think personally that a monetary value should, sorry, a commenter said, I don't think personally that a monetary value should be placed on someone's size. Okay. Could you explain why? Someone said, this case isn't ethical. It completely violates the autonomy of the student. They have the right to decide what to do with their own body. The justice side of this is also not great. The student may have a condition that leads to them being obese, or perhaps cannot afford enough healthy food or ways to exercise regularly. The parents should definitely not be fined for it. They may be low income. Okay, that's a really developed argument, and I see your points of view. I'm just going to introduce the idea. I don't know if anyone's heard, but there used to be a show, actually. I was reading this article, and there used to be a show on TV called, I don't remember what it was called, but it was about children, teenagers or like young children who were sent off to a fat camp for the summer. And this was an actual show on, I don't remember if it was American TV or UK TV, but basically the children used to be sent off, and the counselors at this camp were supposed to teach them how to become fit, and it was documented. And some of the children were miserable throughout, because apparently, like the article said, that apparently they hated themselves for getting to such a size where it was so difficult for them to run or do any exercise. And the reason that they wanted to go to this fat camp, and that their children wanted to actually do the activities, wasn't for their own health, but the article said maybe the reason they wanted to actually continue with the exercise, even though they hated it, was so that they could fit society's standards of beauty and acceptance. What do we think about this? Because I know you're saying, like the parents should definitely not be fined for it. They may be low income. And okay, let's say fine, but then does that mean that why shouldn't people who are it doesn't matter what income they are, but let's say their children have chosen a really healthy lifestyle, why shouldn't they be rewarded for this? Because that might mean, they're rewarding these parents for instilling these views onto children, which are potentially better where they're more healthy and making healthier choices. Or does this, I'm just going to introduce another argument here. Could that count as rewarding certain types of parenting? And does that mean that the government is basically telling parents what to do and is interfering with their parenting style? I'm not saying your point's correct or incorrect. Just think about that. And if anyone has any comments, please put them in. I think since poorer demographics may have a decreased access to healthy food, taxing them may just pile onto the problem. That's a really good idea, because if you have a low income, you might not be able to access fresh food, fruit, vegetables as easily, and it might be more cheaper or convenient for you to access ready meals. And in the end of the day, your food is to feed you. And so if people aren't able to feed themselves with, healthy food, they're looking to feed themselves, they'll obviously have to turn to some cheaper alternative. So that's a really good thought process. But then what if lower income, let's say the government promised lower income families financial help if they taught their children how to eat healthily? Would that be ethically correct? It isn't ethical. The system puts a lot of pressure on parents and can lead to children having mental health problems, such because they do not have a BMI improvement. Okay, is BMI the only way to check the health? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but BMI, body mass index, if you could be relatively heavy for your age, however, you could, that could be muscle mass. Although I do suppose that, you should be having a healthy BMI anyway, but that's a good idea. Children can lead to children having mental health problems. And yes, exactly, that's magnifying the issue that we're talking about, that health is not just physical. It's a connection between your physical and mental, and how that's portrayed outwardly. And that's really important, that yes, and as we discussed, obesity can actually have a risk of mental health deterioration as well. Becoming obese doesn't happen overnight. Any effective method of weight loss needs to be long-term. Yes, that's true, but do you think maybe education is too long-term? A more plant-based vegan diet has scientifically proven to reduce type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and reduce the level of cholesterol. Okay. there's lots of points here and they're all great. I'm just going to read a few more. Why should beauty fit one size? I think if we are trying to achieve a healthier population, there are other ways to go about it which doesn't target the mental health of individuals. Yes, that's true, because you know, beauty isn't once, you know, you don't have to have the perfect figure, you just need to be healthy. And you know, healthy should define beauty. And do you think maybe social media or different outreach programs that we have nowadays contribute to this problem? So perhaps this goes well with beneficence, possibly. There's a big one here. I'm going to read this one. So someone said, societal pressure is a huge factor, definitely. And both the parents and child may want to change, but the method of change must be ethical enough to not force a decision on them or punishing them for trying and not succeeding. The governments shouldn't be telling parents how to look after their child. They can give advice, but any actions have to be done after being educated and of their own free will, which leads to autonomy. And someone said, does government policy focus on the incidence of obesity from self-medicating with food to cope with undiagnosed mental conditions? Shivas, what do you think about this one?
I think what's important to consider here is that, I mean, with this question, does government policy focus on the incidence of obesity from self-medicating with food to cope with undiagnosed? So that question, I think, does link to the kind of mental health aspect of it. And, you know, it is a lot more complicated than people often think. You know, some people do use food to kind of make themselves feel more comfortable, make themselves feel happy, you know, and that can itself lead to problems like, you know, eating disorders, anorexia. But, you know, this policy, you know, might not take that into consideration, that, you know, being obese is a lot more complex than just eating too much and therefore being unhealthy. And I think this comment really alludes to that, because, you know, some people do eat for a variety of reasons. Some people have genetic factors which lead to their obesity. And therefore, it's not just, you know, that black and white. People shouldn't just be punished for being obese because, you know, in many situations, they can't control it. So that's also something that needs to be taken into account. And, you know, a lot of people are talking here about social media, which can influence how people see beauty. Yeah, that's another important thing. And that, again, you know, emphasizes the stigma that exists. I wanted to talk a bit about someone's comment which talked about autonomy. Someone said quite a few comments up, this case isn't ethical, it completely violates the autonomy of the student. That's true, but remember, autonomy is coming to an informed decision yourself. It's not just making a decision, it's coming to an informed decision, being presented with all the facts. And what you've got to think here, you know, just to play devil's advocate, is whether these parents actually were aware, or whether the students were aware of you know, the risks of obesity, for example. So, you know, if a student wasn't aware of this, if their parents had just kind of encouraged an unhealthy lifestyle, then is that really wrong that a child might want to eat more and more, or eat, you know, unhealthy foods because they're simply not aware of the damage that can cause? And in that case, could it be possible, or could it be ethical for teachers to look out for students in the sense that they can try and understand whether students know the risks of obesity and try and educate them about that more? So yeah, I think that's just something to think about. I think we've had loads of points for this slide, and I think that's been really good. But unless you have anything else to add, Sidan, then maybe perhaps we'll move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay, well, actually, I think, you know, a few of the later points alluded to the next slide, which is something, again, we've talked about when we did the session on mental health, and this is body shaming. So body shaming or fat shaming has become, you know, a very important issue, especially in recent years, when there has been a kind of body positivity movement, and this has been particularly noticeable on social media. You know, people are trying to encourage people, especially young children, that they should feel comfortable regardless of what their body looks like. They should feel happy, and hopefully that will lead to less discrimination, less bullying because of being overweight. And, you know, studies have shown that almost all overweight children are made fun of by their peers, and social media plays a large role in that. You know, there are often pictures of celebrities, of models on Instagram that children will come across, and they will think that they must look like that. That is what, you know, a perfect body should look like. And they try and push themselves towards that when it's quite an unrealistic expectation for them to have, especially with young girls. This is a particularly important issue. And you know, studies have shown that quite a significant proportion of teenage girls have thought about trying to have plastic surgery or kind of cosmetic surgery. And that's something which is quite a big threat, really, because obviously that has a lot of risks. So I think social media, and also social media, of course, it doesn't show everything it doesn't show reality in, you know, the perfect light. It doesn't really show what's really going on. There can be a lot of digital alterations, physical alterations, and, you know, that leads to the unrealistically high expectations that are present. But on the other side, some people think that this kind of movement of body positivity doesn't necessarily have the positive impact that it was supposed to. As well as leading to less discrimination, it could lead to people being comfortable or feeling like they are normal in terms of their health if they're overweight. But we saw at the beginning, obesity is a very, very, you know, negative thing, and it can lead to a lot of different physical, mental problems. So is that something that is right? Do you think, you know, even though this could have a good impact on the mental side of obesity, could it lead to children becoming comfortable being obese? And is that the right thing? Is that the right way forward? So yeah, we've got a couple of questions here about whether it's ethical for a doctor to body shame their patient. If a patient came in and the cause of a problem that they have is their body, i.e. they are, you know, obese, is it a doctor's place to tell them that, or, you know, should they just follow the my body my choice rule? Should they respect a patient's obesity, or should they, you know, not? Should they be impartial? Should they try and not express an opinion on it? Is it something which doctors should be allowed to express an opinion on? You know, considering the fact that making people feel self-conscious about their weight can have so many negative impacts. And similarly, should the government try to remove the stigma surrounding overweight people? Is that the right way forward? Should we try and promote different body sizes? Should we try and be body inclusive? Or can that actually lead to a kind of false acceptance or a dangerous acceptance of these body types? So yeah, we'd like to hear your thoughts on this and just what you think. So please do put your comments in the chat and we'll go through them. So someone said, I think using fat or anorexic in a I can't quite read that, pejorative sense, yeah, so like in a degrading sort of sense, can degrade someone's self-esteem no matter how much someone disguises it. It is not constructive and possibly detrimental due to some eating disorders having a cyclic nature. Yeah, that's very true. And, you know, there's no debate to be had surrounding the negative impact of these words when they're used as, you know, offensive terms. If you're calling someone fat as a negative thing, then obviously they're going to feel bad about it. But what we're arguing here is that necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that, is it right that there is this kind of pre-existing stigma in our society about unhealthy bodies? You know, and could that potentially lead to less people wanting to be fat? There have been cases in the news, for example, of people who have gone on, you know, they've been bullied throughout their childhood because of their weight, and therefore they want to, you know, lose lots of weight. They feel really encouraged to lose weight because of this kind of negative atmosphere that already exists. It's not something which I personally believe with. You know, I personally don't think that this stigma should be promoted in any way, but, you know, it's just a kind of argument that people raise when we're talking about these issues. Someone said it would be more ethical for a doctor to talk purely in terms of health about the patient's BMI. Nothing about being attractive in society standards, but the focus being on possible health conditions that obesity could lead to. Okay, that's interesting. But at the same time, could that lead to doctors perhaps sugarcoating a medical condition, or perhaps downplaying it, underemphasizing it, because they don't want to kind of, they're trying to tread very carefully in terms of what they say. If a patient was directly told, you are obese, it's not a good thing, it can lead to many health conditions and it's possibly a cause for your heart disease, for example, is that something which should be done rather than a doctor kind of saying, they're trying to avoid the issue of talking about patients' obesity? And, perhaps if a patient is unhealthy in that sense, could they not realize that something's wrong with them? For example, if people are kind of accepting, unhealthy bodies in the sense that they're accepting obesity or becoming more comfortable with it, could that mean that less or fewer patients are actually going to hospitals to try and seek treatments for heart disease because they're not aware of their own obesity or the risks that it can carry? So yeah, someone else has put, I think there's a fine line between being comfortable in your size and being healthy. This should be addressed. Given that someone is healthy and not at risk, then should be, but made known of the risks to make informed decisions about their health choices. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think, so what maybe you're trying to say here is that, discrimination due to body size or something like that is definitely not something which should be encouraged by, by any means. And people should feel comfortable in their own bodies, regardless of what they look like. But at the same time, they should be aware that, if their body if they are obese, for example, then that can lead to negative health impacts, but that's not something that should be discriminated against. Someone else has said doctors should be allowed to inform patients about their BMI and have discussions about their body, the same way doctors diagnose or talk about other health complications that occur every day to day. Yeah, and I think a large part of that is not judging patients. I think that's very important. For example, many people are self-conscious about their body. Many people are self-conscious about drinking alcohol, smoking, for example. Even if they know the negative impacts of these, they don't want, a doctor to kind of shame them for that. A doctor should not be judgmental. They should not make a patient feel bad for those things, but at the same time, they should make them aware of the negative impacts of these things. They should never be treated badly because of that, but they should be informed in a very, kind of logical way, non-judgmental, neutral way about the risks to their health in a very scientific way, even. So yeah, someone else has put, trying to avoid it would be detrimental to the patient's health. It shouldn't be sugar-coated, but there is a way of communicating this to the patient. Yeah, so I think generally what people have said in the comments is that it isn't ethical for a doctor to body shame their patient. They should never make a patient feel upset because of their body. That's literally the opposite of what a doctor should be doing. A doctor should be trying to help a patient to feel better about themselves, both mentally and physically. But at the same time, a doctor should be able to logically present facts to a patient regarding their body and try and help them, be aware of the risks of obesity, for example, and try and therefore, allow to prescribe the best course of treatment for them. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting argument we've had so far. Someone's actually added, doctors should focus on quality of life and the patient should focus on what their body can physically do rather than what it looks like. Yeah, and so perhaps that's a kind of solution to this whole issue. A way we need to kind of fix this issue is by, not linking kind of a negative body or unhealthy body with, beauty standards. People should be aware that bodies can be unhealthy, but, at the same time, a patient should try and, they shouldn't be too concerned about what their body looks like in the sense that they're trying to, follow a certain beauty standard. Yeah, so doctors should focus on quality of life. They should try and reassure a patient mentally and treat them physically as well. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting discussion that we've had there, and I think we should probably move on to the next slide. So now, do you have any points you'd like to add there? No, yeah, so then I think we can move on.
Cool. I think we're going to go through the slide relatively quickly because I'm aware of the time and we're running out. But so body dysmorphia, I'm sure. Oh, sorry, someone said people should be. Oh wow, that's quite long. People should be free to tell the truth. People want to be attractive. The doctor should say, "You refer to health issues or self-esteem part." Okay, maybe Shivas, do you want to read this while I'm doing the slide, and then you can talk about it later. Okay, so we're going to talk about cosmetic surgery and body dysmorphia quite quickly. Body dysmorphia is a mental health condition where people become very concerned or anxious about flaws in their appearance. It often leads to secondary conditions like depression, as we discussed previously. It is estimated that it affects 1 in 50 people. So just think about that, right? In the UK, I believe there's 60 million people, something about there, 30 to 60 million people, something like that. And so that means that 1 in every 50. So that's, you know, if there's 60 million people, just over 1 million people, 1.2, I think, 1.2 million people, if there are 60 million people in the UK, are affected by body dysmorphia. That's a huge number. Social media has a large impact on what people perceive to be the perfect appearance, because now with the rise of, you know, social media and models and social media, everyone thinks that it's completely necessary to have, you know, the perfect six-pack abs or be the perfect model body type. But it's completely fine to just be healthy rather than being, you know, the complete epitome of fitness. Some people with body dysmorphia try to alter themselves through cosmetic surgery. However, less than 10% of patients are satisfied with the result and often become anxious about another part of their appearance instead. So, should the NHS offer cosmetic surgery for purely aesthetic reasons? Does anyone have any ideas? I think we'll take a few and move on because, again, we do have 1 or 2 more slides to get through. But does anyone have any ideas? Should the NHS offer cosmetic surgery for purely aesthetic reasons?
I think maybe before we address that, maybe I could just talk a little bit about that comment.
Yep.
It's quite a long comment, but yeah, I think it was very interesting, your point. And you've kind of raised the issue that, you know, people shouldn't be, you know, try to hold back these opinions. They shouldn't try and, you know, doctors shouldn't not be able to tell the truth in terms of they shouldn't not tell patients that they're fat when they are. And you've mentioned that if you lie to people about that just to protect their feelings, or if you kind of sugarcoat it, then that doesn't really help the issue. That creates a false sense of security, a false sense of being comfortable, which isn't necessarily right and doesn't help solve the issue. And I think that's very important. You've called it constructive criticism, but, you know, like we've mentioned before, I'm not sure if it is exactly constructive in terms of the mental burden as well. So, you know, perhaps a solution is not to sugarcoat these issues, isn't for there to be a stigma surrounding telling people that they are fat or obese and therefore unhealthy. But at the same time, we should do it in a way where we're still respecting them as people and we're still not kind of dehumanizing them or making them feel bad. But we should focus on it in a more scientific and logical way. We should tell people, you know, as doctors, we should tell people that they are unhealthy and try and address that without judging them, without making them feel, you know, substandard because of that. So yeah, I think that was a very interesting comment though.
Okay, so someone's in the chat said body dysmorphia is definitely exacerbated by social media and the television showing mainly one ideal type of body. Since these issues are mental and often long-term, and due to the low satisfaction rate, the NHS should offer the service to patients, but only in cases where their health is suffering due to body dysmorphia, and they have received mental health services first, and the therapist doctor agrees with it, agrees it would help their well-being. Okay, that's a really good answer, and I'm not saying it's correct or incorrect, but I appreciate the fact that you've thought out your points, and I like the fact that you've added that if all other opportunities have been exhausted, because it's not, it should, you know, invasive surgery should not be the first resort in any case like this unless it's very severe. Someone said, perhaps yes, because not everyone can afford private healthcare, and if such conditions left untreated, it might just cause more psychological problems such as depression and anxiety. Yes. Let me ask a question then. Do you think that if, for example, liposuction would be offered under the NHS, people would be less likely to take care of their health and less likely to stop themselves from going obese, because they would feel that they could easily just go in for a free surgery for a liposuction and then be treated of this? Or do you think that's not what would happen, and why? Any ideas? I think there should be a certain BMI or weight to have the procedure done. Okay, people don't really have a casual attitude to surgeries. They will try and avoid it and eat healthily or exercise more instead. Okay, both good ideas. It's just something to think about, and it's a very tricky debate because we don't know what would happen in a hypothetical situation. But it's a really good thought process that you've applied here. Shivas, do you have anything?
Yeah, so I think the point you raised was actually very important, very true with regards to, especially in developed countries or richer countries where these kind of surgeries, liposuction, for example, they're, available, and it's possible to get them without much of a kind of cost, or, it's not impossible to get them. It's relatively easy to kind of treat them. And we're living in a society where it's becoming increasingly possible for people to get these kind of treatments. And if that increases, then what it can mean is that, again, it can lead to a kind of divide in terms of wealth, with the wealthy being able to afford these treatments and other people not being able to. But at the same time, some people argue that these cosmetic surgeries, these procedures can help people feel more comfortable, feel more, it reduces the risk of mental health disorders. But at the same time, it can lead to them increasing. And I think that's because, because it's still perpetuating the kind of idea that we need to look in a certain way. If people are undertaking these cosmetic surgeries in order to make themselves appear more like the perfect body, then that kind of perfect body image is being, emphasized, is still being perpetuated in our society. And that just leads to a cycle of more and more people wanting to look like that, if more and more people do look like that when it's unrealistic. Instead, if cosmetic surgery was banned altogether, or it was completely, if it wasn't an option at all, then perhaps that would lead to more people being comfortable with what they look like, more people being, not wanting to look a certain way, and therefore reducing the need for these surgeries altogether. So, that's just kind of an interesting point, and it shows kind of both sides of the argument here. So yeah, I think we've had some good points in the chat. I'm aware of the time as well. Perhaps maybe we should move on to the next slide. Actually, someone has got a comment here. Banning things doesn't always often work. Black market, underground, and more risky surgeries may happen. Yes, and I'm very happy you mentioned that. When we talked about organ donation, we saw that if it becomes harder for organs to be donated, then it's possible for people to just import them from abroad, where it's unreliable. There's an unreliable supply, and they don't undergo the same health kind of checks, and that's that thing. Same with marijuana. So that's another risk as well. It could lead to people trying to obtain these surgeries without, illegally, essentially, which would just not only perpetuate this problem, it would keep this problem going, but at the same time it would increase the risk of these surgeries. So yeah, that's a very, very interesting point. So perhaps we should move on. Yeah, okay, so we've kind of got a debate slide here, but we're not going to spend too long on it. It's just essentially a summary of what we've talked about today. And we'd like you to just put, a kind of summary sentence or just an idea that you have regarding this question. Should the government play a role in promoting health among the population? And, how do you think they should actually do that? Do you think that they should do that by enforcing taxes? Do you think that they should have a kind of body police thing where teachers are told to look out for their students? Do you think they should reward healthy lifestyles, healthy diets? Or do you think they should focus more on education, promoting fitness programs, or that kind of thing? Or do you think they should just do nothing at all and leave it up to the autonomy of consumers themselves? So yeah, what do you think about these things? And just put maybe just a one sentence, one kind of final point that you'd like to say to express your opinion on this. So someone has already put, yes, the government should play a role in promoting health through education and advice and methods that promote autonomy and are easily accessible to all people no matter their background. Okay, that's fair enough, but perhaps you could give a little bit more detail regarding the specific schemes, because which methods do promote autonomy, which of these methods can promote autonomy, and are any of these methods, more accessible to certain people than others? Does it still allow people to have, all people to benefit? Someone else has said the government should partner with the NHS. They shouldn't offer advice alone. Well, I think a large part of what the government does in terms of their advice is coordinated through the NHS. But, yes, I suppose you're right in the sense that they should work with the NHS to raise awareness regarding certain issues, regarding the risks of obesity, to promote, obesity awareness, for example. Someone else has said it's both in the interest of the government and individuals to promote good health, but this should be achieved in a way that doesn't negatively discriminate based on things like wealth or social standings. Campaigns should offer regional campaigns. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. So a lot of people are talking about kind of education, because that's a way which doesn't discriminate based on social standing or class or kind of wealth in general. So I think it's an interesting idea. Siddharth, do you want to perhaps go through a few more of these?
I think actually all of them are being sort of covered, and actually I think the main points that are coming across are, autonomy matters, but the government should be helping their population get fitter, but not in sort of an oppressive way, more of a enrichment way. So I think it's going well. So yeah, really well done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So thank you, everyone. I think that brings us to the end of the session today, and I think we've had some really good ideas, and hopefully we've allowed you to learn a bit more about the issues regarding the government and their involvement in public health and in supporting people's health through the NHS and through other schemes, and hopefully this will prompt you to think a bit more about this, do a bit more research regarding these schemes, and think about what you think is best for this country in terms of promoting a healthy lifestyle. So yeah, thank you very much for attending. And again, we hope that you'll join our session next week. And we do have a couple of kind of notices before you do leave. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, which we've set up recently, where we kind of explain all our previous sessions. We will record them and put them up there for you. Please do follow us on Instagram as well, where you can also get in touch with us and also ask us any questions. And also, usually in the past we've had people obtaining the link through our Instagram groups, but we're trying to move now to an email-based system. So if you'd like to stay on our mailing list, please do email us on the Medical Debate, and we can add you to the mailing list through that, so you can get the link easily. Yeah, the session next week will be confirmed. Actually, hang on, there's something else we needed to announce regarding the sessions. So there won't be a session next week, and actually we'll confirm this, but we are going to have a little break due to exams. We understand that it's quite a busy time for a lot of people regarding exams, so hopefully you understand this. But we won't have a session next week, and we will confirm the details of this through email. But please do continue to, keep in touch with us to ask us any questions, and we will email you regarding the details for our future sessions. Yeah, thank you very much for attending today, and please do feel free to leave the meeting now whenever you want.